Hello and welcome to another session of Great Shout Marketing and Growth Interviews. I am Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and your host for this series of discussions. In this series, we're talking all about how a startup moves to a scale up and the pain points and the areas that they face as they're going through that. These are nice warts and all interviews with marketing experts and leaders and business owners who've really gone through this process. And we hope it's going to be really useful for CEOs and founders that are going from that startup to scale up phase. And today we've got Stephen Croome. He's really great early agency experience. He's both agency side and in-house side as well, so I've got a good view there. He's run an SEO agency as a COO as well. And he's sold everything from flowers to insurance, which I love, a good breadth. So Stephen, welcome.
Thanks. Hi, Ed. Glad to be here.
Good stuff. So the first question I always kick off with, how do you define when a startup moves to that scale-up phase?
It's tough. I think the scale-up phase is far later than most people expect. So, and this comes from my time working in VC, mostly, like this insight, working at the seed stage, moving companies on to Series A, Series B, where you think at that point, okay, they figured everything out. That money is just to help them scale. And quite often they still haven't figured everything out, right? So for me, when you're ready to scale is you have proven how you're going to scale. You understand what you're going to do. You've got some repeatability there. You know, if I put X more money in, what I'm going to get out for that money, right? So I think for me, it's a very clear line of where you become a scaler. But a lot of people think they're there way before they are actually there.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, it's interesting, later than you kind of think. And are there, clear KPIs that you then have for a startup phase where you move from a scale up and you're kind of thinking in different ways? Be good to understand those kind of KPIs and kind of metrics.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, there will be change as you move, right? You're going to bring in new departments, new people. You're going to organically grow KPIs. But from a marketing and a growth point of view, if I'm looking at cost per acquisition through Google Ads, that goes through the start to the end of the business. I think there's a kind of tying this question to the previous question as well. For me, what I'm looking at is quite often when you invest at this stage, you're getting a product founder and a company. They spent the last couple of years building products and hoping that this product CEO can become a business CEO. And that's not always the case. You quite often find people who just want to stay at that level and just like have their head down and build a product and hope the business grows. So one of the things that I've kind of learned to look for is in the CEO and the senior team is where are their eyes, where is their time focused within the business, right? Are they still looking at the nitty gritty with all these teams that should just be building stuff and executing? Well, if they're doing that, they're not mentally ready for the next phase. Or are they, have they brought people in who are going to do the day-to-day and they can look forward at the next few years and ensure that the growth happens and all these things, like the business side happens. So for me, like it's a really interesting distinction when a business moves from being a product-focused business to a business-focused business, right? And I think when you become business-focused, then you're kind of falling into, okay, now we can start scaling up because we're looking at the right things. We're dealing with the right things at the top of the business.
And just
so what you don't want is somebody, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to
say what you don't want.
Unpack like a bit more, yeah.
Okay. Is there's often a tension between people wanting a founder to change their perspective and move on, but that founder's not ready yet, or that team's not ready yet, or the business still needs some fundamental changes before that happens. And I think that's just, people wanting different things, different types of pressures from different people on the business. I worked with a business that had, a CEO who was definitely the looking down, didn't want to scale up beyond his country, but his senior team of CTO, the head of sales and the senior marketing people, they were like way ahead of him, and they were trying to push him on to do this, and it created a very unhappy situation, right? And me looking in from the outside, I'm like, well, these three guys are completely right about what needs to happen for this business over the next year or two. But if the person at the head of the business doesn't accept that, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well. Potentially, you haven't kind of discussed it before around that tension within the C-suite of that kind of movement, and when people are kind of ready to pull the trigger and start scaling up. And naturally going to have that kind of tension. But how was that kind of resolved then? Could you then persuade the kind of CEO to take that action? Was it the influence of other people within the team, or just couldn't get it resolved?
No, they just zombied on for a few years and got acqui-hired by a competitor.
Right, okay.
Right. So not a great result there for that team. But for me, that was all down to the CEO's kind of attitude and perspective not being correct. Right. And being able to look at that at that time as a VC and go, oh goodness, like this rewrites completely how I think about investments, because you can invest in a great model, right? Or you as a marketer or a salesperson, you could join the business going, okay, this model is great, this product's great, but the perspectives and the attitudes in the business of the people could be wrong. And then you're not going to get anywhere. So I've kind of learned over the years that products, all that stuff is pretty immaterial. The main thing is the attitude of people, right? If you work with people who have the right attitude, you can overcome any problem. You can build any solution. But if the attitude's wrong, you may have a good product today, but it doesn't mean you'll have a good product in a year's time or 2 years' time.
And is that down to a particular culture which is instilled at early days? Or is it down to just an ethos of kind of execution and just kind of cracking on?
A bit of both. I'd love to talk about the culture bit, but I have seen people who I think, God, they get it wrong so often, leaders who get it wrong, but they work incredibly hard and they just smash on through, and eventually they get there despite their mistakes. Right. So I really also value working with people that have a lot of like resiliency and energy and just get up and do it, because that covers mistakes that you make along the way. Right. So there's definitely an element of that. Like you don't have to be right all the time, but you do have to work hard all the time to make it work. Right. And I think the other thing in culture, which I've thought about a lot, and I have a very, I think, different definition of culture than most people. So I see that a business's culture is derived from what the CEO does when things go wrong. Right. So how does the CEO act when somebody makes a mistake or there's a problem? And to me, whatever that is, that's what filters into the rest of the business. Right. Because that's what gets judged, what's right or wrong. It's always based on like what the CEO would say about that situation. So if you have founders or CEOs who are open and understanding and are looking at the long term and have low ego, that tends to develop a good culture, right? Because that flows down from them. If you have the opposite side, somebody who's just completely pig-headed, driven by their gut, it's very hard to work successfully for somebody like that. At some point, you're just going to reach your breaking point and go, I can't deal with this person anymore, right? And maybe you leave, or even worse, you stay, but you lose your love for the job and you're not really trying very hard. So I think the other case is, with that concept of culture is also the concept of ego, right? So if I look at all the businesses, which are like hundreds and hundreds of businesses I've worked with now throughout my career, the ones where people have low ego are the ones that succeed. because nothing gets in the way, right? The ones where people have high egos, they spend a lot of time arguing about stuff that doesn't make any difference.
Mm.
And if I think of like some of the best companies I've worked with, worked at, worked for, that is like across the board in all of them. People are like very open. They want to understand things. They're willing to look at the business through the eyes of the customer, right? And that's a very big reason why you need low ego, because if you want to succeed, you have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of your customer and go, am I building the right thing for them? Am I communicating the right thing for them? If you can't do that, it becomes very hard to succeed.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, that kind of angle, because often you kind of find that business leaders do have a level of ego that drives them on, or sometimes it's a chip in some way, right? They've got an itch to scratch, and then that kind of forces them on. So I suppose it's a balance to say that you've got the drive, you've got the inbuilt kind of understanding of the market. But then you can also build a team around you that wants to work with you. I suppose it's that kind of fellowship, isn't it, as a leader, rather than being kind of dictatorial in that way. So it's fascinating. And I suppose moving on from that kind of founder position from a startup going to a scale up, what are your kind of views on kind of hiring or bringing teams in? Have you kind of naturally seen a pattern to that, or something that works well, or is it it depends?
It depends, right? So it's because people make lots of mistakes in hiring, especially early stage, right? And when you're moving from the startup to the scale up, there's normally a lot of friction, a lot of pressure, lots of things. You're growing in all different ways in your business. So you're feeling pain in all different ways from that growth. And you're desperate to bring somebody in to solve that pain point or take care of that thing. So there's always this very big push to like, let's make this pain go away, where actually the better thing to do is wait till you get the right person. So that's one thing. I've also seen I think generally people are pretty bad communicators. And this comes forward, in no better place than in recruiting. You look at a job description, and it's just, for me, I can look at a job description, see all the red flags all the way down. I can look at how you write a job description and know exactly how your company works. And then occasionally you run into a job description, you think, damn, that's great. I'd love to work with those people.
Mm.
But those people and those job descriptions only come from people who are very reflective, low ego, understand what they want, right? Understand like very specifically exactly what their business, their customers needs from you when you join, right? To me, let's say a bad CMO recruitment would just be everything's generic, right? You want to see something that's written by a human being that understands the business, that understand what they want from you, that understand the customers. You see that, it's like it's a breath of fresh air when you're looking at job descriptions.
And I suppose, if you look at something that's formulaic, it doesn't stand out, and it doesn't kind of bring you in and make you enamored to actually apply for it. Have you, I suppose, in terms of bringing in those the right people when they apply the job descriptions, do you believe that you want to kind of show or have them show that they've done the same thing before, or the
Not
ability to
necessarily.
learn? Yeah.
Ability to learn over everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Low ego and the right attitude over everything.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe I'm a little against you have to have done it before, because I never feel like as a marketer I have to have marketed that specific product before, right? But I know I can market anything, so it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to think of some of the teams. If I give you an example of one of the best people I ever hired, and at this company, we didn't have a normal job description. It was like you filled stuff out, you answered some interesting questions along the way so that we could understand something actually about you. And then you would come in and give a short presentation that we would talk to you about. And this chap came in on a Friday afternoon. I guess was very nervous, presentation wasn't very good. and was like, we liked him, but it wasn't good enough to meet the bar. Right? And then on Monday morning when we came in, he'd spent the whole weekend fixing everything, learning stuff, figuring it out. It was like, I went back, I went over it. Here's what I think. Can I come and do it again? That guy was like the best hire ever, right? So when people are able to kind of respond in that way, you're like, oh, that's pretty good.
And they see it back to like the level of tenacity, right? If he knew that the presentation wasn't good enough, but he was tenacious and determined enough to then prove it to you, then that shows how he'd apply himself if things didn't work out. So yeah, no, really interesting. Yeah. In terms of that kind of view, like early stage, you often have like more of a kind of generalist in place. Mm-hmm. And then as things go up, depending on what kind of channels you have in place, you get more kind of specialists in. Is you kind of any learnings from that in terms of how a team can scale to make sure that those specialists are still coming together and moving in the right direction?
Then you get the right type of people, and you have to know what you want to achieve with them. Mm-hmm. So if I look at the company I work for now, it's an AI consultancy. And when I started working for them, I was the one person doing everything, right? And now we've grown the team. And I always look at a core startup team is like, you need somebody who can do the creative bit, and you need somebody who can do details, numbers, and analysis bit. And a lot of, especially startups, you're trying to find both of those in one person, and I've never really found that to work very well. So I have somebody now who does all the creative stuff, like gets videos made, does podcasts, blogs. He loves that. He's great at it. I have somebody else who is actually a developer who can build things for me and do analysis and connect stuff and that. And I have somebody else who does outreach on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So I'll work with her doing, copywriting and targeting. And I think that the group of the four of us now can scale for a very long time without needing to add more. Right? Like once you have the bases covered, you can actually do a lot for a business. Now, part of that is because I cover a lot of things myself. Right, so I do pay-per-click, I do the copywriting, I do UX, I do a whole lot of other stuff. I do events as well for the company. But I think that core team, if you have creative and you have data, you can go very far just putting those two things together. I saw one of your questions was going to be, I'm going to preempt you on, bringing people in-house or using agencies. Mm-hmm. I've never liked agencies. And maybe this is wrong of me, because I see there's two types of CMO or marketing leader. There's the person who's a marketer and the person who's a manager. Mm-hmm. And the manager types tend to bring in all these different agencies because they don't really know the technical details of what's going on. Right. So I've gone into a number of companies, looked into what the agencies have done and go like, this is rubbish. You're being ripped off here. But you don't know it because the person in charge of this doesn't have like the technical skills to understand this. Right. So for me, it's always in-house is better. I can give an example. Just last month, though, I did bring in another SEO to have a look at our website. And so just for 2 days, have a look at the website, give me your thoughts. Right. And this is somebody that I worked with before, exceptional SEO. I know thinks very differently to me and would look at different things than I would look for. Right. So I'm like, okay, 2 days at your day rate, that's worth it to get this. But I think that only works because I can interpret it. I know what I'm looking for. I understand, I'm going to understand when he comes back with anything. So that's kind of the way I would prefer to use an agency. It's just like one-off things. It's very rare that I found agencies useful for anything, to be honest. I mean, even
poor agency people watching.
Yes, sorry to all my agency friends.
I think that was,
from a marketing point of view.
Yeah.
So, or a comms.
Yeah.
We had a design agency at some point in the past give us a design deck, and basically they probably pushed a button that made a 20-page design deck. They give that to all their customers, but the people at the time didn't understand this is just some generic thing. They thought, oh, this is amazing, this is great, and we're going to stick to it like glue. And I look at it, I go, okay, well, you could just have downloaded that off the internet if you wanted to. Right? There's no value there. But yes, I do have also very strong views on design and designers, especially when it comes to marketing and communication. Not many of them favorable views.
And I think the interesting debate around kind of agency is, are they providing a level of kind of strategic insight that you may not necessarily see from the inside, or are they able to come in and do a bit more of the kind of heavy lifting where you've got a kind of skill set or a resource that you can't use and then they can help? I think, or I suppose what I see there is that, to your point, actually, that if they are doing the heavy lifting, you need to know as much as the agency. Otherwise, it's very easy for the agencies just to pull the wool over your eyes. I think, I've spoken to other agency owners on this as well. And, the classic challenge of the agency rolling out their big guns in initial kickoff meetings and getting over the line, and then juniors taking on the actual delivery of the work, which is not as good as what was expected. It's the agency model. Otherwise, it doesn't necessarily work out in terms of day rates and things like that. But it's very difficult if that expectation isn't delivered. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And interesting, very interesting to say that, and fair that you don't want to work with agencies in that way. Yeah, go on.
No, go.
Yes,
I was going to say, maybe as an example to that, for us now, our technical people, our data scientists and machine learning engineers are amazing, both technically and with clients. And we've been able to understand that we have this opportunity to build very long-term relationships with large companies who will work with us over years on loads of different AI projects. But those doors only open if the people are amazing and build good, build trust. They get trusted by the people in those businesses. So we have those kind of people, and it means like we just get all this value from that we don't really have to work anymore for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there's a lot of work to close the first deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it costs us a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of people working on getting the first deal closed. And the value of just being able to keep working with that client is phenomenal, right? If we had to just keep winning each piece of work, did it badly, and the clients never came back to us, we really wouldn't have a business because we wouldn't be able to afford it. Right? So there's an incredible value in doing good work, right? And I think so the forum we both belong to, how many times in that forum are people recommended, companies are recommended by somebody who says, I use this company, they are great. And that company has no idea that they were recommended. Right? They have no idea why that business ended up coming to them. It was completely in the dark. So if you do things well, you get all these tangential benefits that come to you.
Nothing converts as good as well as a referral, right? Because you've got that third party stamp for approval, which means you have that level of trust. And yeah, interesting as well in terms of early stages of startups bringing in customers, that level of lifetime value where you retain those customers and provide good value based on the product actually delivering or the service actually delivering is classic kind of land and expand. Yeah. I suppose moving just because limited time, what would be interesting to kind of get your opinion on is kind of channels and that kind of channel kind of market fit at those early stages. Are you a kind of proponent of a person where you'd see 80% of new acquisition comes through that one channel, and then after that, in terms of the scale up level, as opportunity to diversify those channels, or is it a mix as well? Good to get your thoughts there.
Unfortunately, it's case by case, right? Depends what you're selling, who you're selling it to, what options you have, how long is your sales cycle. You're saying like nail polish, they see an ad, they click, they buy. You get, that loop is very quick. You can learn a lot from it. Selling insurance or like AI consultancy, massively long loop, right? It depends. I mean, you're definitely looking to nail a channel, right? So if it's pay per click, you're trying to figure out, okay, what works for me here. I mean, for us, especially if I go back a couple of years doing the pay-per-click for AI, like we're competing against IBM, like we're competing against the world's biggest companies. But what I know is I can find keywords that come up, like ChatGPT, right? Like just one day appeared, that these mega companies are too slow to jump on board and advertise on, but I'm agile and fast enough to be able to do this. So I'm constantly looking for new keywords, new angles, what terms and phrases are coming up in this area that I can get on before the mega companies have any clue what's going on about it. Right. So I think also to that point, what I saw a lot of is a startup will try something, it won't work, and they'll go, okay, well that's crap, terrible, it doesn't work, and then they'll move on to something else. And the truth is often, no, it's not that it doesn't work, you just haven't done it correctly. So when I look at the way I look at everything is I want to do like 10 of everything and then reflect. Right. So we started maybe last year, we started doing events. And we had no idea. We just thought, should we do an event and see how it goes? And for me, I'm like, okay, we have to think about this as 10 events. Let's do 10 events and then we reflect. Because you don't want something to go wrong in the first one. Everybody says it's terrible, but actually it would be an incredible channel for you. Right. So in all of these things, I'm looking like, how do I learn? I think if I'm going to say a channel doesn't work or close down a channel, I must understand exactly why it doesn't work. Right. So I need to be able to explain that to everybody else. We're not going to use this because of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. We've got some data that shows this. Right. Like I think you need to get to that level of understanding of it before you can say, okay, I don't want to do this. Yeah. And I think from the startup point of view, you need to do a lot of different things, right? You are just experimenting. And I know that probably doesn't always feel like it as a marketer in a startup and you got some pressure to get stuff done, but your whole business, every part of your business is an experiment. Like the product people, the sales people, everybody's trying to figure out how we're going to make this work. And if you look at it as, okay, how many experiments can I do? I think that's a good way to look at it. How can I have a longer term view than just, okay, I've got to make this one thing work. And that never really works. So, I mean, yeah. I was going to say, maybe as,
you go.
maybe as a pay-per-click example, working with very early stage startups, they're like, you're not going to make money on this. We're trying to figure out where the market is. We just, even it's a way to create awareness where you're so early stage, nobody knows you exist, right? Well, let's start getting some people coming to just put eyeballs on us that we think are kind of the right people. See if we can learn something from that and then keep going.
And yeah, again, really interesting around that kind of speed of execution versus the delivery of execution, because I think, sometimes you do your acting really fast, but then if it's not the high level executed and you make that decision to kind of write it off, then that's a negative. I think the comparison to that as well is sometimes with data, it's causation versus correlation, right? And you make decisions on the data, which in some ways is a gut feel thing versus actually, well, is it the cause? Just because they're correlated doesn't mean, and people jump to those level of conclusions based on data. So I think that's important to get right as well. Again, I mean, really interesting for you to know as well in terms of like channels that stand up on their own and a view of that, but also where the brand fits in overarching on it and when the brand is important from that startup to scale up. Because we all know that strength of brand can actually make a massive difference to direct response channels, right? Because there's that kind of level of view of a brand. So it'd be good to know when you think that works.
It's tricky because I also have very different ideas on what a brand is. So, because I worked with a lot of luxury companies in my time, and they are all about brand, but they have no real understanding of what's happening. They just say the words. For me, brand is what somebody will tell somebody else about your company or about your product. And that's it. And when you think about that, you realize actually you aren't a brand. You are a whole load of different conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to spend like the most insane amount of money, like Nike money, to be able to change the conversations that people have about you. Right? That's, as a startup, as a small business, what goes into those conversations is how well you do things, how well you communicate with people, how does your product work well, what happens when something goes wrong, how do you respond as a company. Those things fuel all those discussions that people will have about you. So I would prefer to focus on that rather than some grand term of brand. Right? The way I look at brand for our company is, I say my job is only two things: to get leads and to make sure people think good things about us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the event we do is in the Barbican Conservatory. So beautiful venue. It's an indoor rainforest. We spend a lot of money and we do it like absolutely the best we can. Right? Because to me, that's what I want to do. That's how I see that. And that has had all kinds of like crazily positive knock-on effects for us that we didn't even think about, but we just knew we want to do everything we do as well as we can, because that's how we want people to think about and talk about us. Right? And I'm not a stickler for getting it right now. I still have that. We'll do 10. By the time we get to the end of 10, we'll know exactly how to do this the best. And I just accept that there will be mistakes and problems and things along the way.
Do you find that sometimes that as a kind of startup has maybe pivoted in a few different directions, it's got to a stage where potentially you can start scaling up, that there needs to be a leveling in terms of the value propositioning and messaging at that stage, or is sometimes internally it's harder to describe exactly what it does because there's a number of different markets that it delivers on, and then reflect that externally as well?
Yes. So they like it's a maturity, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and the business has to mature. I always think of websites. It's like an evolution of a business's or a startup's website. Like day one, you're a one-pager that says, we do this. After a while, you're like 10 pages, which is basically little product things on a contact us page. And then the next evolution is, okay, now we're like 50 pages. We've got specific landing pages. And we want some of them to work for SEO and some of them to work for PPC. And then the next evolution is like, okay, much bigger. Now the website has to work for recruitment and for things that the sales team needs, right? So there's this evolution of your website over time based on what you need, based on where you are. That's kind of how I look at how things need to change over time. It always goes back to, what do we need from this right now? And how do we make it do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. Running out of time, I suppose a question before we kind of finish there, maybe kind of actually on pricing, because we haven't kind of touched on pricing. How does pricing change, or when do you review pricing as you scale from kind of startup to scale up, especially maybe going after kind of other markets, like larger markets, like say enterprise, for example?
I would say most companies do this horrifically. They launch with a price and then they don't think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like until like maybe in 2 years' time, somebody goes, oh, wait, maybe this should be different. And then everybody scrambles. So I think one thing is to be aware of pricing is something that can change, and you need to pay attention to it and understand what you're building, right? So it needs to be somebody's maybe responsibility to be the person who understands pricing in your business. I think that would move businesses very, very far ahead. If I think of it's the craziest concept of pricing. A company I worked for out of Poland, they did coding tests. They're called Codility. So if you want to hire a web developer, you can give them a test if you don't understand. And they were selling them, and I got there at $2 a test. and people were taking these tests for like in the valley for like 200,000 a year jobs, right? So that was a case of this pricing model is completely crazy, completely wrong. And where we moved it to was we looked at, one was realizing the actual value we were providing to people. And these lovely Polish engineers and technical people thought, well, the price should be related to what it costs us, right? Which is a terrible idea in that case. So what we looked at is what is the most valuable tool for recruiters? And then we want to be just below that. Right. So when we looked at that stage, it was LinkedIn, and I think it was like $7,000 a year. Okay, that's what we're gonna peg ourselves to. We know we can't be more than that because we're not more useful than LinkedIn, but we are very, very useful. So we think we should be around that. And that was a huge leap forward for the company for understanding how to value what you do. And it's not the value of what you do, it's the value that you deliver to somebody else. Right? And you need to understand what they would consider a fair price for it, not what you think a fair price would be. Right? And we did a lot of different tests along the way, doing different packages and this and that, or buy it for a year, try this. So there was a lot of actual testing over about 2 years of different price points, different ways we could communicate them, putting different things into each bucket as we try to figure out, how to do it better and better.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, really amazing. And amazing insight into that and how you could change that pricing and that anchoring as well. Look, we're out of time. Stephen, I appreciate it so much. It's been great to chat. The final question I always ask guests here is kind of what is the one best piece of advice you could recommend to a CEO or a founder of a company that's going from that startup to scale up phase?
Hire the right people. And I think hidden behind that, I'm a big fan of the 5 whys. Right? It just goes back to ego. Right? You want to look at yourself, figure out like, where is my ego getting in my way? How can I remove my ego from my decisions and how I react emotionally to things, and then try and find other people that are similarly like that.
Makes sense. But thank you so much. I
Thanks,
really
Ed.
appreciate the time. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next session.